Hello, everyone, and I'm greeting you today in Naratorica, and we have our 12th podcast. Me, Masha Kachukova, and Zhenya.
Hey, Zhenya Pazankov. And today with
And
us
our guest,
is
yes, and our guest.
today with us our guest is Colin McComb.
Yay!
Hello, everybody. How are you today?
Yep, we are waiting for you guys to write us something in comments, so we know you are here. Please, how to say it? Give us pluses or something.
Write something Masha specifically likes if you just write pluses if you can hear us all right, if you see us all right, if everything is all right.
Yeah, they're here. They're writing.
Wonderful. We are not alone. We're not alone here anymore. All right. So shall we begin proper?
Yep.
I'm ready.
All right. So Colin, you know the usual drill. We have to start with you telling about your whole life story in a little gist.
Okay, let's see. I'll do the super fast version. So I was graduating from college with a degree in philosophy, and everybody was all like, "Hey, Colin, what are you going to do with your philosophy degree? You're going to go sling burgers? Would you like fries with that?" And little did they know that I'd been a nerd all my life, and I had been playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was about 10 years old. And so I had written to TSR, the publishers of Dungeons and Dragons, and they gave me a writing test, and they called me up, and I had a job waiting for me on graduation. So I started writing Dungeons and Dragons professionally straight out of college. And when I was there, I did a couple of sort of forgettable things. I wrote the complete book of elves, something called Thunder Rift, which is apparently still popular these days. It's cool. And then also the things that I'm probably best known for there are the Birthright campaign setting, and then also working on the Planescape line. And it was the Planescape line that took me to Black Isle Studios, where I was the lead designer on a PlayStation game set in the Planescape universe, along with a couple other games. And then Interplay realized, wait a second, we have three Planescape games going on at the same time. That seems like a dumb idea. So they canceled mine and rolled me into another smaller team for something called Planescape Last Rites. Well, it turns out Last Rites was a name already used by a different computer game, so we changed the name to Planescape Torment, and the rest is history from there. I also worked on Fallout 2 while I was there, and then helped develop a campaign world for Black Isle that sadly they never used, because they went under shortly thereafter, and I don't think it had anything to do with my game. And then I moved to Michigan, where I did some teaching of games. I did some more tabletop freelance with Paizo, working on the Pathfinder system, and with Monty Cook Games, working on some of his stuff. And then I got a call from Brian Fargo, who asked me to work on Wasteland 2 and then to be the creative lead for Torment Tides of Numenera. And in this time as well, I started a game company with my wife called 3 Pound Games, and we are currently focused on developing VR solutions. Mm-hmm. So that's the super short version.
Well, it's still, even in the super short version, there's plenty to talk about. It's probably one of the most diverse portfolio that I have seen.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm ready to talk about any of it.
We're going to start, though, with Tabletop, mostly because everybody who we were speaking here have mentioned Tabletop as being very important in their development of careers. Same with me, with Vampire the Masquerade specifically. Same with Masha, and everybody is just using that. And we have no idea how it's the development works on the other side. So there will be just blind questions, as in, how do you work on tabletops? What do you do?
Wow, that's a really broad question.
We will start. So we'll start broadly. We will try to get more specific as soon as we can.
Well, so the first thing I would say is, first you need to play these games, right? You need to figure out the kind of game that you want to develop, and then you need to play that kind of game. If you're doing something entirely different, from anything you've played, then you want to play something that's at least in the genre. So if you're developing, say, a cyberpunk kind of game, then you'd take a look at Shadowrun or Cyberpunk 2077. If you're developing a post-apocalyptic game, you'd want to look at something like what Interplay did with the Special System, or look at Metamorphosis Alpha or Gamma World. You want to be broadly conversant with the genre that you're hoping to explore, and chances are good that somebody has done something similar to it, even if it's not exactly the thing that you have done. I've been lucky because with Tabletop, I've gotten to jump into established systems, so I haven't had to work as much with developing things from the very ground up, because that's a whole different ball of kittens, which I am proud to have just invented.
All right. So, we do need to get specific.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you work on mechanics and setting. In which order?
Ideally, you do both at the same time. You have, one of them informs the other, right? It's the whole ludonarrative dissonance thing that everybody was very excited about a few years ago. You want to make sure that the actions you take in the game reflect what the game's theme is about. So, you don't want to have a game that's all about, talking and conversing and diplomacy and so forth, and then it turns out your mechanics are all about stabbing people in the face. Because, that's sort of, that's one of the big complaints about Dungeons and Dragons, right? Is that they're like, oh, yes, it's a game, it's a storytelling game, and it's all of these things. And it turns out that the majority of the roles or the majority of the mechanics are focused around combat. And so it turns less into we're going to have a cool courtly intrigue scenario, and more, hey guys, let's go be some murder hobos and kill some people and take their stuff. That's pretty much where it is, yeah. So technically, I would say that you want to work on both of them at the same time. You can focus more on one than on the other, but concurrent development is good.
Can you describe with a example? With an example, do this mechanic setting stuff in practice?
Well, okay. So, like for instance, when we were developing Birthright, we knew that our mandate handed down was we want the players to be kings. We want the players to be rulers of the land. And so we already had the base of Dungeons and Dragons stuff, and we needed to figure out how to make the domain management stuff fit in with that, while also supporting the main theme of the players being rulers. And not everybody's going to be the ruler of just a kingdom, right? You're going to have churches are rulers, or mages are rulers, or there are thieves guilds, or assassins guilds, or merchants guilds. All of these are different kinds of power. So we had to figure out ways to make the domain management reflect the different sources of power that people could have in running, their kingdoms. And so we had to essentially figure out how all of this was going to work together with the existing rules, with the mandate that we had, and with the idea of what we were doing over here. So it can get really complicated really fast, but if you just can distill down what your basic idea is into a core mechanic, the thing that the players are going to do most frequently, that makes it a lot easier to move forward, because then you've got your core mechanic and the ancillary actions split off from that as you're developing it.
But regarding the complexity, but how do you manage? Because like with Tabletop, like judging by all of our previous experience, like Vampire the Masquerade is supposed to be, court drama and intrigue and stabbing people in the back, and it has always descended for us into a chaos and all around gunfights. But it's not like what the game is. Well, the current version is kind of supposed to be that, but the previous one was just not accommodating to that. We still managed to do that, and we just basically rolled the dice on every sneeze or something. But how do you, while you're making them, like prepare, if you even do prepare for those situations?
It's really that comes down to just play testing, right? I mean, you should be play testing your game constantly, and if something is not fun, well, okay, so the cycle is, okay, awesome, we've got this great idea, cool, let's run with it. You've got your mechanics and it's all sort of fun and you're figuring everything out, and then you realize this doesn't work or this doesn't work, and you have to start stripping it back, and the fun slowly disappears from it. You're like, oh, great, we've lost the fun. And then either you figure out why it's not fun, or you can build fun back in. But it really all just depends on the feedback from your playtest groups. And I wish I could give you better advice than play your game, but that's pretty much it. It's just you've got to play test, and if something's not working, don't be afraid to throw it out. Because if it's not working and you're just spending too much time on it, then you're wasting your time.
All right. This is like not quite unusual situation. We are like literally have no idea how to make it from the other side. So like, yes, Masha, please do.
Okay, one question. Where do you start working on like tabletop game?
Where do I start? Or
with a team. Okay, you want to make a game. New settings maybe, or an old setting, or a new set of rules. Where do you start? How do you start it? What is the starting point of the process?
For me, at least, it's figuring out like what the world looks like. I'm essentially there's a reason I'm on this podcast, and it's because I believe in narrative. I believe that the mechanics are basically a foundation on which to hang the narrative. So the important part for me is what story do we want to tell with the players? How do we build up something that people are going to be interested in? What's that cool thing that's really driving me? So I figure out what that is first, and then I'm like, okay, so how are we going to make that work with these rules? And then we start figuring out the rules. Once we've got the broad outline over here of what's going on in your head, we're like, okay, cool. So we can use D100. Does that work? We could use D20. We could use D6. Whatever. You want to figure out what your, how difficult do you want things to be? Wolfgang Bauer has one of my old TSR colleagues has a company called Cobalt Press, and he has some books about game design that are really, really good, and I encourage you to check them out. And it's in part because I wrote some essays on building systems in there, just like really quick and dirty about how to do it. You want to think about what your system does for you. Like if you want to focus on combat in your game, then you're going to say, okay, cool, we're going to have a lot of, here's how armor works, here's how guns work, here's how knives work, here's how damage works, here's how healing works. Whereas if you want to have a game that focuses on diplomacy, you'd say, okay, here's how speech works, here's how charming people works, here's how convincing people works, here's how diplomacy works. And you build your systems around these things. And ideally, you make it simple enough so that people aren't spending the whole evening going, okay, well, let's see, according to this, I've got a +5 on my speech roll, and that means it modifies my diplomacy roll, which in turn modifies my, going to the bathroom roll. And through that, I need to roll, 5 different sets of dice, and now I forgot what I was doing.
So it's kind of you're navigating, funneling players' actions by just making some parts of the system, some parts of the activities way more specific.
Right. You want to make it really accessible. And it's essentially UI, right, for a tabletop. The more modifiers you have to something, the less accessible it becomes. So if you have it very streamlined, then people can just get into the story, they tell the story, and they don't have to spend a lot of recourse on the dice rolls. I don't know if either of you ever played the Amber Diceless role-playing system. It's been years since I looked at it. But essentially, it's just your character sheet is essentially you have ranks, like I'm the second best at this, or I'm the third best at this.
Mhm.
And then when you're talking to somebody, you compare your skills or your ranks in those skills, and whoever is better wins.
Mhm. Oh, so just like that, without any dice, without nothing.
Yeah.
Oh. Oh, that sounds problematic.
It was. It needed a little bit of work, but it was a really cool launching point, I thought, for okay, you know what, we're just going to resolve these things quickly, so we can tell the story, we can move on with what the story is, without like, okay, well, looks like we entered a combat, we're here all night to figure out if I hit you or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used the Fallout pen and paper ones, and all the percentages directly from the computer game. You basically had to have a calculator with you all at any point. But how do you figure out the balance between the specificity and just like specificity and simplicity, for lack of a better term?
That's really playtesting. It's down to playtesting. It's, you know, what you've got to figure out ahead of time, or I guess during playtesting, what the optimal balance is. And while you're playing it, you know, is it, as long as it's still fun, then go with it. But as soon as it stops being fun, as soon as it starts being like a chore, as soon as it starts feeling like a grind, then just give up. You know, say, okay, cool, we're going to dial that back because it's not helping. You know, like I said, it's really crucial if you're developing a tabletop game that you just learn to sacrifice your babies. Not literally, because probably be bad.
We will need pictures of your children with a newspaper. Authority requires them.
Photoshop is really easy these days, so cool.
We pretend we didn't hear that. All right, but yeah, it's kind of like a thing with Vampire the Masquerade, and I will be returning that for tabletop regardless. It's just the one that I'm most familiar with.
Yeah, I should tell you that I haven't played the latest edition. I don't think I've played it for a couple of editions actually, so I might be a little out of date on it.
Yeah, well, it's basically the only thing that was like I picked it up like a month ago. I suddenly just like figured it was 7 years without running any tabletop. You know, and we had a bunch of like conversations about tabletop. I just decided to start to get into that again. And the new version, they just made it more, I'd say, accessible. They basically simplified a bunch of roles. It used to be that, for starters, the whole mathematic with data D10s and what is a success, what is a crit success, and shit like that, they have streamlined it completely. And well, the first one was quite easy to get into. This one is just way easier. And that seems like just a conscious choice, not necessarily based on playtesting. Like this is the stuff that you can just skew in any which way. So, well, what's your opinion on like just that they make it?
I'm sure that they spent a lot of time playtesting. They've got a large team. They've got smart people working with them. You know, people who care about game balance and people who care about narrative flow. And you know, from what I've heard, it is a solid system. And so, you know, cool if they managed to make that work. I really enjoyed the first edition. Just because, you know, it was a lot of fun having those dice pools. But
all right, let's get it more into like the more DM part of that. Like, how would you design how do you the masterclass in designing a campaign?
Well, I mean, there's the whole bit about you know, like with the players, you're like, okay, cool, I'm going to design this game. It's going to be super Arthurian, low magic, and it's going to be very serious and grim, and it's going to be a bloody slog, and it's going to be really cool. And then your players come in, and it turns into, you know, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So it's a question of boy, I'm really gonna have to think about this one. It's it really does require working with your players to figure out the kind of campaign that they want to play, and knowing your table so that you can tailor something to them. You know, I mean, is your game mostly about mostly about dice rolling? Are your people min-maxers? Are they rules lawyers? Are they full-on storytellers? Are they thespians?
Mhm.
It a lot depends on what the play style is there.
Mhm.
But once you've got that, and you can tailor it for it. For instance, I was thinking recently of a campaign that I wanted to take my son and his friends on, which would essentially have been a couple of kingdoms warring with each other, and they were just like messengers and spies. So they would there'd be pitched battles they could get involved in. They could run back and forth, carrying messages with all of the intrigue and drama that could bring up. That gets them into courtly intrigue. It gets them into low places and taverns. And there could also be, monsters and crap they could, detour off into. And then I was talking, more with my son about this, and he was telling me more stories about his friends and how they would run around and just stab each other, and they were all chaotic neutral. And I was like, I don't think I want to DM this.
And how did you adapt to that?
I haven't run it for them yet. I've been having a discussion with them about the importance of if they're playing, the DM is not just there to be like, okay, roll, okay, use this roll, okay, do this thing. It's a joint storytelling exercise. So they need to be cognizant that it's not just about them running around and laughing and stabbing each other. It's about everybody working together to create an enjoyable narrative experience.
Mm-hmm. So just to Mash.
I have a question. Another question. How do you establish conflict for a tabletop game? I think there is a conflict about dramatic conflict and game itself, mechanics. I know how to make dramatic conflict for a story, but how to make it work in a game, it's a huge problem, I think.
Well, like, what are you having trouble with?
For example, okay, let's say you have a bad guy, big bad guy, and you need to make a player hate him somehow. And how to do this? Because usually people use really big cutscenes for this. But in tabletop, you don't have cutscenes.
Right.
Or in PC games, you don't want to make a cutscene for this. How to make it with mechanics, this dramatic type of conflict, or it is impossible?
I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's the question of when the players get their input. If you've got the big bad guy up there giving the monologue, and one of your players is like, you know what, I don't even want to listen to this. I pull out a dagger and I whip it at him. Well, you basically just got to go with it.
Like you were told.
Yeah, you can't be like, no, you can't do that. Oh, he casts a spell on you. It stops you from doing that, so he can keep monologuing. And no player wants to play in a game like that either, because at that point it's just they're like, okay, cool. So we're going to sit here and listen to you tell us a story while we press F to pay our respects or whatever. And nobody wants to do that. It's you've got to work as a team in doing this. So you can't expect the players to just sort of sit back and bask in your brilliance, and at the same time the players can't expect you to sit back and just let them indulge in bullshit.
Okay, so do you plant conflict into the mechanics of the whole setting?
Yeah, I mean, the mechanics themselves should, in theory, cover any of the conflicts that you want, right? And you've got your character sheets, so you build up your antagonists with that. You've got the players have their character sheets, but as far as the mechanics of conflict themselves, like if
I mean, in Lord of the Rings, the good and the evil. This kind of conflict, the big one.
Right. So that's like kind of an alignment-based conflict almost. So you could build in systems of morality like that if you wanted, or you could build in economic systems, for instance. People really get pretty antsy about that, it seems like. There's all sorts of ways that you can use mechanics to sort of heighten conflict and push people into further disagreement with each other or into accord in order to increase or decrease the conflict.
Oh, thank you. I think this is a brilliant thought to make an economic system just holding this conflict or moral system in it, like capitalism and everything else.
That'd be actually kind of a cool system to play. I expect to see you do this.
Oh, thank you. We have a question from the auditory. Veronica asks, let's say I want to make a tabletop game to play in a circle of family or friends who don't share one language. Is there a way to make a good narrative game not relying on language?
What does she mean by language specifically?
English, Russian.
You're sure?
I think I'm sure, because today I played a game about languages from this Ludonarracon stuff.
Yeah, I would think that there's charades, there's Pictionary, any sort of drawing kind of game, for instance. Or when you're acting things out with your hands, you could make a sign language game so that you are developing a shared language based among everybody there, for instance. Having a game where you actually create the language amongst yourselves, I think would be a really cool way to do a shared or a non-shared language game.
Nice. Have you ever constructed languages for your settings?
No, not really. I've made up words and things that I thought sounded kind of cool together, but I haven't gone into the whole, okay, and now here's this word means this, and this word means this, and now I've got this whole constructed language, and now I'm going to go sell it to the Game of Thrones people.
It's too late for that now.
It is. Which, cool, I guess. I've sort of checked out at the last season here. I'm just like, oh no, it's spoilers. Oh no.
No, last season divides people. We will not get into that anyway.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to rant about it really quick. But all right, we can keep moving.
Well, we will all start ranting.
Yeah.
Chaos. Well, I'm tempted to continue with the world building. I'm still this is the problem that I have seen with some people that have been DMing us, and in general, like what I've heard about people just being terrified by the complete freedom of the player, which is in tabletop. It's completely there. Like unless you do the roles, people can just do whatever,
right?
Almost literally. So how do you sort of direct their experience, and to what degree do you allow them a complete freedom?
Boy, there's well, okay, so it's a difference between, like, if you're doing a one shot for people, it's just a group of people gathered, say, at a convention, and you've got a 4-hour time slot. That's very different from okay, these are our players, this is the campaign. If you've got a regular group of people and you've got your regular campaign, then your job is basically to dangle fishhooks in front of them. You pass bait along the way to incentivize them to do these things. But players are really tricky because, they walk into a tavern and you're like, okay, well, sure, there's a barkeep, I guess. Oh, and look, there's a gnome who's sweeping up the fireplace. And they're like, ooh, let me go talk to the gnome. What's his name? You're like, oh my God. I don't know. His name is Nomi McGnomeface. And they go, oh, well, Nomi, tell me all about your life. And it's like, oh my God, okay. So, in a case like that, what I tend to do is I say, okay, well, if you guys are going to get really into this gnome's life, I'm going to take this bait that I had set, further down the road here, and I'm going to put it in this guy. So, if you're going to be interested in this guy, then here's the interesting thing that I want you to go do. And if they don't take the bait there, you could just take that and drop it into somebody else. And then it starts feeling like a recurring theme. People are like, oh, crap, everybody's talking about this corrupt noble who lives up on the mountain here. Okay, I guess maybe we should do something about that. And if you've got a group of annoying players, they'll be like, oh, well, corrupt nobles, we don't want anything to do with that. We're going to come over here into this area of the world that you have entirely not developed and tell us all about this desert.
Oh boy.
Whereas if you've got a convention group, then those people will, they're there for the game, right? So they are less likely to be distracted by the tiny, stupid, shiny things that you've thrown in as filler. So they're going to say, okay, cool, what are we doing here? And you can also say you've got defined players or defined characters, and this is your backstory, and this is your current goal. So there you go. Whereas, it's basically about setting goals and expectations for your players, I guess, is the really short version of what I was trying to say there.
So you sort of make a flexible system that just there are a bunch of fish hooks that you can put in every other person and sort of adapt to that extent.
Exactly, and inventing silly voices, that's important too.
that I can attest to. And frankly, it's one of the most fun parts.
Yes, but then people wind up judging you based on that, and you're like, okay.
I had a problem with that here in Germany because the only accent I can do in English is Russian, and no, they just assume that every other character in this American town is Russian.
Nice.
Yeah, but I completely drilled myself. Yeah. Okay. So you're designing a campaign, and you are figuring out these fish hooks and stuff like that for a long-term campaign, right? So it's not a convention game. It's not a one-shot. You actually want to invest into this stuff, playing it every other week. And you start with, you don't come up with a tabletop from absolutely nowhere. You just take an existing system, and your team players, they all let's say, adventuring and just spelunking and shit and fighting some stuff. To grossly simplify that. Which parts do you focus on in the, how do you approach the design of the story, of the basic ones? What do you start thinking about first? Is it the setting? Is it the different characters, or just the whole, or the spine of the story, for lack of a better term?
I tend to think more about the spine of the story. I figure, where I want them to go. Actually, I do more of the world building first now that I think about it, because that helps me figure out what's going on in the area around the players. So I say, okay, so there's say a monster invasion over here, and there's some sort of weird technomancer thing happening over here. And so the conflict is coming in around here, so the players can navigate this conflict, and then they can swerve here or here. But either way, I've got a spine of a story ready to go for them. Or perhaps they want to help out the humans who are being besieged on both sides. In which case, they can, they've got 3 possible ways they can go. So planning these things out and creating the hooks on each of them is, it gives you enough time to plan in case, or rather to improvise in case they say, okay, well, yep, we're going to go to the technomancers. You're like, okay, cool, I've got something for that. But, players can also be like, well, we're going in the 4th direction. This seems like a really shitty place to be, so we don't want to be here right now. Okay, cool. Going to go hit the gnome village and get all the gnome secrets. That's cool.
How do you prepare these contingency plans in case all fails?
I generally have have little notes based on these things. I plan out my adventure for people. The adventure that I hope that they would go on anyway. And, I keep trying to herd them back to it with nudges and not so subtle hints, increasingly less subtle the further off path they get. And if they get totally off path, I just say, all right, well, look, you guys are going in a place that I totally haven't prepared, so we're winging it now. I'm going to keep trying to steer you back to where we are, but just so you know, this is a lot less prepared. So good luck. You guys want to go into a dungeon? Cool, I haven't made this dungeon.
So you just openly just warn them that just break character and just, hey, guys, I have no idea what's going on there. It might suck.
Yeah, it seems like I want to be honest with them, right? I don't want to pretend that I've got everything all planned out in the back of my head, and it's just this whole world is waiting to be birthed. When in fact I've only prepared this narrow slice over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they just insist on doing something, I can either take the pieces of what I've done here and try and modify it for what they've worked on, or what they're aiming toward here, or I can just say, all right, cool, let's wing it. And if all else fails, get them in a fight. And that will take up much of the rest of the night.
And that will give you about 3 hours to come up with the Nomi village with all the Nomi stuff.
Exactly. And then once you've stalled enough, you can be writing down quick dungeon maps or whatever, and quick, okay, well, let me flip through here, and okay, we're going to use one of these monsters. Okay, cool, ready to go. All right, back on track. So,
I'm raising my hand. So about story spine, do you use some structures like hero's journey?
For a tabletop campaign, not usually, because that, I like to have the arc of, sort of low building conflict. I tend to go through like, an Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 style thing. But players will screw up a hero's journey generally. Unless you've got really committed players for it. But you can't force them to feel things. The old man and the old man offering them something. You can't expect that they're going to be like, yeah, no, forget it. I'm noping out of this call to adventure. Oh, well, it's that, it's the inmost cave. Well, I'm not going to go into that.
I roll seduction.
Yeah, exactly. I seduce the dragon. 20. Cool. Okay. Well,
you gotta obey the dice.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to fudge the dice unless everybody agrees that it's something they want to do for narrative purposes. But on the other hand, getting a really good die roll, that is actually a moment that people really remember too, when they came through in the clutch. Or they just got incredibly lucky at this big dramatic moment. That's the kind of thing people like to remember. So you don't want to be like, it's actually not a critical.
Just to take it from the reverse side, killing the players. Like it's always like a problem of like the guy just does something stupid in the beginning of the session, and like you have to and it basically kills him by the roll of the dice. And like, how do you approach this situation? Because I've seen our old dungeon master, he would just go, yeah, you are dead, make another character. And we were very hostile towards him, and he was very hostile towards us, which was fun though, in its own masochistic way. I myself just sort of give them either the common sense sort of skill. So like, this is the common sense, don't. And just allow them ability to revert those. What are like, because you don't want to like just completely derail the whole session just because one person is dead now. So how do you approach that? Do you like make people prepare another like side character, or you have like a stash of characters to give them just in case, or you just don't kill them?
I generally try not to kill people unless they're doing something incredibly stupid, unless they're just insisting that they're doing something stupid. I am gonna go kick the dragon in the balls while it's asleep. Okay, really? Yep. Okay. But if they're like, say, trying to sneak into a well-defended armory, for instance, because it's important for the story, I'm not going to say, oh well, they capture you and then they torture you to death. Because that's not as fun. It's more fun if the player would get killed, if they get captured and then take the player away for questioning, because that gives the rest of the party a good dramatic narrative reason to go rescue that player. So it turns into an opportunity for other better, deeper stories, because that's also the kind of thing that can draw a party closer together as well. They're like, okay, cool, I understand you guys have my back now. And now. So now we're all buddies, and that actually does more than the hero's journey for a campaign, I think.
So you introduce sort of instead of death, you introduce a different condition for the player. So like instead of being killed, they just are unconscious and they wake up in a different place or something.
Yeah, possibly. There's also the case that if they enter a battle, people will die in battle, and if that's the case, and I know that there's going to be something like that, then I will have them make new characters ahead of time, just because I want to make sure that they're not out of the whole session because of some unlucky dice rolls. I also tend to tailor this based on the group I'm playing with. Some people don't mind if they get the total party wipe, whereas some people would prefer to go on with these characters who they've known to grow and love. So it really depends on the people you're playing with. But personally, I prefer not to be just indiscriminate with killing people.
What about because just basing off that DM and that hostile dynamic, which kind of still haunts me to this day, because the guy was a bit of not a bit, he was actual real asshole, which we kind of just didn't notice for 2 years, and we eventually just resort to basically we are just, as the players, we are trying to screw as much as we can with DM. And DM was actually he was good DM, so he was always on point with that. And I'm hoping nobody will get into that situation, although again, it's in a masochistic way, it's really fun. But how would you sort of herd the cats? Because at one point we just figured, okay, so you want us all to stay in one place, let's just scatter. And we at some point we started arguing with each other, and we went all different ways, and it was completely unmanageable. Basically, it was like herding the cats. So how would you? What kind of advice you can give to herd the players who are just making your life more difficult?
Man, honestly, for something like that, I think I would probably break. I wouldn't be the kind of asshole DM who wants to encourage people to go run off and break the whole party up like that. But B, I would break the session and be like, all right, if you guys are doing this, that means I'm doing one of you at a time, and the rest of you are off doing your own thing. So you might as well go scatter, because now I'm taking half an hour for each of you as we play. So you're not going to be sitting there and listening into what this dude's doing. You're not listening to what they're doing. It turns it into a one-on-one gaming session, and that's a lot less fun, I think, than the whole point of playing these kinds of tabletop games is that people come together as a group. So having to break it up like that really sort of defeats the purpose.
Okay. Let's. I think I'm out on the tabletop. Mash, you have something on tabletop? Otherwise, we'll get into what we're doing.
First of all, is there any gamey stuff in tabletop games which is ruining experience? From your experience,
is there any
gamey in PC games, we have UI, we have lives, or some stuff which can exist only in games, and usually sometimes if we don't put it in some narrative story, it ruins experience. I know that it is a game, but I don't want I want to forget that this is a game. Do you have some stuff like this in tabletops?
Interpersonal dynamics can do a lot of that, I think. If you're playing with people you don't like, for instance, that really ruins it a lot. Having a crappy GM, I think, also ruins it. Just because, you're being told, for instance, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go do this thing. The GM's like, nope, you can't do it. But my character, nope, you can't do it. It's not part of my story. Okay.
It's like invisible walls, yes?
Yeah. I mean, it's basically the thing that ruins tabletop games, I think, is just the lack of coordination and lack of communication. Um, if people aren't willing to talk to each other and work these things out, it can totally ruin a group.
Okay, the opposite question. Which is the best experience from tabletop games? Which is the wow effect of games? Do you know from your experience?
Well, I guess it would be the reverse of that would be, communication, coordination, people all working together to deliver something that it's like creating art together, basically.
Do you think that it could be life-changing experience?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that you can make lifelong friends. You could meet people who you later wind up marrying. You can meet people who become your worst enemies. Gaming has an unparalleled ability to bring out what is deep in people and what is true in people. Or some people are like, oh well, cocaine makes you more like what you really are. But the fact of the matter is, I think gaming does.
Okay, that's really interesting. Do you think that people behave like their true selves in games, or they just try to try things?
Yeah, well, there's the whole role playing aspect of it, which is one thing. But if you've got somebody who is so into doing their own thing that they are unwilling to work with the rest of the party, then you've got an idea that that person's probably fairly selfish, for instance. Or they're willing to derail things for their own personal enjoyment. I think that people who are disruptive at gaming tables have, you're seeing something about them. Possibly it's just a temporary thing, possibly it's how they really are. But I think that you really get a sense of who people are by the way they play.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, okay. So the next bunch of questions about world building. First, do you like world building at all?
Oh God, I love it. I love world building.
Okay, do you have some like strategy or like plan for it? How do
Yeah.
you do it?
So the first thing I do is I figure out the theme of the world, right? For instance, what does the world look like? What are the important things in the world? One of the things I used to tell my students was just take our existing world, right, and then add one fantastical element to it, and then see how that changes. So, for instance, if we added Star Trek's teleporters to our modern world, think about how much everything would change in there. That would be the fundamental driving disruptor of modern society, or replicators, for instance. Suddenly we'd have no more famine, we'd have no more struggle for resources. Everybody would have everything they need. So, what would the world look like then?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's these kinds of, I guess, mental games that you can use to help construct your own world, right? So if you're doing a fantasy world, like, okay, what kind of fantasy? Is it high fantasy? Is it low fantasy? What does magic look like in this world? Is it people like drawing energy from the ground? Is it people pulling it from the air? Is it people like having, accessing living things or the force or whatever? Or are they calling on demons? Are they calling on angels? All of these things will influence the way magic is seen in the world. All of these things will influence the way magic expresses itself in the world. Infernal magic is going to be very different from nature magic or ley line magic. If there's any magical creatures, how common are they? Are there, are they like fairy tales sort of hidden away, or are they the big orc army in the east coming out of Mordor?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you just have to figure out what your world is going to look like, and then just game out what it looks like from there.
Okay, okay. So this is the basics, and the magical system or some like фантастическое допущение, fantastical.
Uh,
help me to translate it.
Oh, I am not a translator. Fantastic.
Okay, that's okay. So you have in the basics this one different fantastic part, yes?
Mhm.
And what do you do next? Like economics, politics, geography, biology?
Again, it really depends on what you're hoping to do with your world. What kind of adventures do you want people to have in this world? If it's a lot of travel, then you're going to want to focus on geography. If they're going and running into strange creatures, then it'll be biology. If they're transmuting themselves to different planes, then you're going to want to worry about what the cosmology looks like. If they're going to be in a lot of wizard battles, then you want to figure out the magic system. If they're going, and it basically really depends on what your focus is going to be.
Mm.
So.
Okay, thank you. What instruments do you use for this? Like some wiki engines, or what? Documents?
I read history, like nonfiction stuff as well. Just so I've got a lot of stuff like kicking around in the back of my head, but Wikipedia is great. TV tropes actually is great if you have the willpower not to get stuck there all night. I think seeing what other people have done with their stories can be really useful for developing your own stories, right? But doing the historical research, doing the philosophical or psychological research, and then just having that base of knowledge ready to pull forth something, even if it's only vaguely remembered on your part, can still turn into a really cool way of telling a story. I mean, we all know that crystals don't really have magic healing powers, but wouldn't it be cool if they did?
That's actually a good point. Just to add to research for that last team on the tabletop, the one guy picked the insane Malkavian who is into conspiracy theories.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really fun researching the conspiracy theories for about 2 days. Well, it was supposed to be 2 hours, but then the conspiracy theories happened, including documentaries on flat Earth, on everything.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of really good conspiracizing going on.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, I think I've got my. Oh, I do. Hang on 1 second.
Oh.
Oh, we got the props.
Yeah, guys, look at his shelves.
Okay, so I need to recommend this book.
Big book of conspiracy.
Yes, some good conspiracies, and while we're at it, I've also got the Big Book of Death.
Wow.
So these are cool things to look at. You don't have to get super into your research. You don't have to be like, oh well, I've gone back and referenced St. Thomas Aquinas and the roots of the Greek Orthodox Church. You can just do a quick bit of popular research. You don't have to go super in depth to make these things cool and interesting. You can totally just draw something off the top of your head and then just run with it. And that's one of the things I like best about world building is that it's your head. You can do the shit you like.
Well, thank you, guys. We have a few minutes left, so you may write down your questions in the comments.
Meanwhile,
about
world building, like we were talking about. Huh?
Stick.
Okay. No, I patiently waited. So we talked about just one fantastical element in our real world, but I'm going to bring up Numenera and Ninth World, which is completely alien.
Mm-hmm.
There is only people are people, and even that is not exactly true. How do you approach the completely alien world? Where do you even start?
In that case, the cool thing about the alien worlds is that you can use them as reflections of ours. So, I mean, as people, as players in these worlds, we still bring our own modern sensibilities to it. So we can use this entirely alien setting to reflect back on crap that's going on in our world. So it's, they're both mirrors looking into each other. or windows, I guess, if they're looking into each other.
Can you give an example from Ninth World?
Well, okay. So, for instance, the Aeon Pope is going to raise a crusade against a weird influx of things to the north of the Steadfast, and that also you can build up a whole militarized storyline in that, and you can reflect on how that happens in our world. You can draw inspiration from our world on what a militarized buildup looks like. And then say, what would that look like with the detritus of 9 massively great civilizations stacked behind it? People finding, like leftover jet engines, or people finding weapons from these unimaginably powerful civilizations. What is war going to look like in a world where people have the ability to crush reality down into a single infinitesimal point? There's a lot of really cool stories you can tell and do with these things.
Mm-hmm. So you still apply people, but to the it's not an alien, but it's still people that are driving it.
Right. Yeah. Because the main setting of people in that setting is Earthlings, who look a lot like all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So. Nobody knows where all those people went or when they came back, but it's still humanity at its core. Slightly evolved monkeys.
Thank you. And I think the last question, there is one question about instruments, but not the instruments like knowledges, but instruments like engines or nodes, or how do you structure the process of your work for world building?
I tend to use like Word or Google Docs, and I just start outlining things there, and then I fill in my sections. So I'm like, okay, so I've got my world building, so let's talk about the geography of the world. Okay, here's the main feature of what I want this campaign to do, and I fill that in. And I'm working in outline form essentially, so it's not like, okay, here's a great big novel about how all of this works. It's essentially quick notes to myself, so that I can say, okay, cool, this deserves more explication. And then I can work off of that and turn that into something bigger and cooler if I want. But it's essentially just outlining things in a word processing doc and figuring out what I want to expand on later.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So, Zhenya, do you have some questions?
Do we have people in chat?
No.
I can't. Again, we rely on the audience.
Actually, our audience are not good with English as like me.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, this is
part we already had conversation about your English skills. Pretty good. So.
Well, this is the purpose of the we still do one in Russian, one in English every month, and the English one is sort of so the people are more used to hearing English, more used to talking English, so that they see Masha struggling with English and still coming out on top.
Mm-hmm.
But they write in thanks to you, and that podcast is really awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I've had a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, I guess I will sign off. You guys have a fantastic weekend, and I hope your hangover goes away.
We do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, bye.
Bye. Bye.